In the Perspectrum podcast, we discuss controversial topics. Outside of this context, Michael and I are both working professionals. While doing this show, we are not acting as agents or representatives of our respective institutions, and none of the views that we express reflect the outlooks of our employers. So don't come to my office and throw toilet paper at me.
And I don't have an office, but don't come to my cube.
Welcome to the Perspectrum. I'm Nathan Seelove.
And I'm Michael Bloom.
And we finally have a non-depressing, terrible gut punch episode for you all today. I am so excited to not be bringing you terrible, horrible, no good, very bad news.
Yeah, me too. This is nice. This will be fun. We should do this more often.
We should do this more often. The world should be in a place where we can say good things about it more often.
Yeah, although, like, as we get into our first segment, I think a lot of the trend, like the reasons behind some of the results seem to all be like, people agree the world's not an awesome spot.
True. So we're going to talk about 3 international elections that we thought were important that happened recently that we're going to discuss. We're going to discuss the election in the United Kingdom. We're going to discuss the election in France, and we're going to discuss the election in Iran, which all had results in which the more bad option did not win.
Wow, that is
so
really
that's
bucking
good.
the trend. That's nice.
How about that?
That's nice.
But before we get to all of that, I have a shameless plug that I would like to make. I don't know if I've made a reference to this on the pod before, but I wrote a book.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Nathan Seelove, author. Wow.
Yeah. Well, actually, I'm going to be using a pen name, which is going to be my initials.
Oh,
so it's actually
nice.
NRG Seelove, author.
Wow, how cryptic.
Which also happens to be my new Instagram tag, which I have created recently in order to promote my book. So it isn't out yet, and it is still going to be a little bit. I'm just starting to begin kind of the stages of marketing, but it is pretty far along in the editing process, and I'm pretty confident that it's going to be published sometime before the end of 2024. But if you are interested, I should probably tell you a little bit about it. The title of it is The Assassin and the Sorceress. It is a queer romantic fantasy adventure novel. And it is about, I'm not going to give a bunch of details just yet because, we're still a little bit early, but it is about a elven assassin who falls in love with her mark.
Oh.
And it's a sweet story. It's got spice. It's got action. It's got a cute romance. It's got trials, tribulations, and of course, because it's me, it's got political intrigue.
Ooh, interesting. Yeah, this is exciting. I'm excited to read it.
Yeah. So if you're interested in following the process of that novel being put out there, you should follow my new Instagram, which is NRG Seelove, author.
Nice.
So look me
awesome. Up. Yeah, Bree asked me like, what does the RG stand for? And I was like, Nathan Randolph Gray Seelove. And she was like, how do you know that? And I was like, babe, I knew his middle names before I knew your middle name. Like, get in line, Yeah, that's super exciting. Congratulations on the authorship and that it's getting so close to being published. This is amazing.
Yeah.
Behind the scenes, I've been hearing about this book coming along, and it's clearly been a tremendous amount of work, but also like every time Nathan talks to me about it, he's super excited, and it's clear that the project is going to be a great one. So I can't wait to read it.
Yeah. Oh, and I forgot to mention that one of the main characters is autistic.
Oh, yeah.
So
nice.
So, I know a thing or two about that, as I've mentioned on the pod every now and then. Speaking of things that we've mentioned on the pod every now and then, other countries in the world exist besides the United States. It's not just like the United States and then no man's land. It's the United States and other places.
Mm-hmm. And
they're just marked other places.
Yeah, and there are some other places that exist that we don't have to apologize for the United States existing also. So this time we're not doing a sorry we fucked up your country. We're actually talking about things that are
Although we
going
might
okay.
do a little bit of that
Yeah,
in
there's
the
probably
Iran segment.
Towards the end, yeah.
When we're talking
for
about
sure.
Iran. Because that, I believe that actually was one of the first ones that we did a sorry we fucked up your country.
Yeah, for sure. Just 2 out of 3 countries that we'll talk about. We didn't.
Hey,
Yeah.
that's, I mean, you know,
By our normal track record, that's pretty
by
good.
our normal track record. Yeah.
Yeah.
All
Usually
right.
It's, yeah.
All right, so let's get into it. Let's start with the people that we just recently celebrated our independence from, the UK.
Yeah, ironically, they had their election for parliament and then therefore the selection of their prime minister on July 4th.
Which
Uh,
that couldn't be a coincidence.
I know. Well, it probably is. I mean, like,
I don't think that's a coincidence.
that is. Yeah, I mean,
Michael,
according
this
to-
is America. We're all America centric here. So of
everybody-
course it was about us. It was completely
everybody in the
about us.
world decides things based on us. Yeah. So, yeah, the UK had a snap election. It was announced on like May 22nd that they were going to have an election on July 4th, which is remarkable that can even occur that quickly. But good for them. So they were like already going to have an election with a vote called before January, according to their rules. But Rishi Sunak went ahead and called for the election early, presumably in an attempt to get ahead of their like declining poll numbers on the Conservative side.
Yeah.
So just for a bit of background, like the UK political landscape is at this point like kind of dominated by kind of 2 main parties, the kind of center right Conservatives and then like the center left kind of Labour Party. And the Conservatives, they've been in power for a long time, like for like 14 years, with various prime ministers. Currently the Conservative prime minister prior to this election was Rishi Sunak. He had been prime minister since October 2022. And then the like main challenger, or the person that was selected as prime minister after the results of this election was Keir Starmer, who is the head of the Labour Party.
Yeah. Also, I don't know if I would call them a center-right party per se. When
Yeah,
you look
I mean,
at kind of
well,
what they've done in the UK for the
Yeah.
last 14 years, they really have gone full-on austerity. Now, compared to the United States,
Sure. And
They
compared to
are-
their far right parties as well.
compared to their far-right party, like compared to the United States, they're probably in line with the Democrats,
Yes.
honestly.
Yeah.
But that's because the Democratic Party in the United States is a fucking right-wing party.
Yeah, totally.
But yeah, so in the 14 years that they've been in power, they've implemented austerity politics. They have basically lowered the funding for things like the NHS, the National Healthcare Service, which actually resulted in a lot of the issues of increased rationing for non-essential procedures. So one of the things that you often hear Republicans criticize about universal healthcare systems in the United States, like when people talk about it in the United States, Republicans will say, well, look at all the rationing that happens in places like the UK, where people have to wait long periods of time for non-essential or non-emergent healthcare procedures. Well, the reason why they have to wait so long is because the Conservative Party, which they're also referred to as the Tories, which you'll probably hear us also referring to them as the Tories in this segment. It's because the Tories cut the fucking funding to the NHS in the first place. So what that should tell you is that when and if we do finally get a universal healthcare system, at that moment you want to make sure that you never elect any Republicans again, because they will do as much as they can to sabotage it.
Yeah, they can barely fund anything that doesn't have bullets. So
One thing that I always thought was kind of funny is historically the biggest reason why the Tories got into power in the first place is because Britain, at the time the prime minister before the Tories took office was Tony Blair, and the Britons were pissed off at him for one specific decision he made. I mean, probably many decisions he made, but there was one big thing that clenched it. You know what it was, Michael?
What?
He supported the Iraq War.
I was gonna guess the Iraq War. Yep, that makes sense.
So let's also, before we talk about the election itself, let's just
Yeah.
talk a little bit about how the British form of government actually works,
Totally.
because there are definitely many differences.
Yeah.
So the British have a parliamentary system. What that means is that their head of state, who is the prime minister, is not actually directly elected by the people. Instead, they are elected by the parliament, who are elected by the people. Now, it is a multi-party system. Now, there are two major parties, like in the United States, but unlike in the United States, some of the third parties actually do have some power and do have some seats in the federal legislature.
Yeah.
So right now, the three biggest parties are the Labor Party, which is the center-left party, the Liberal Democrats, which is the center party, and then the Conservatives or Tories, which is the more right-wing party. But you also have several other parties, like the Scottish National Party, that actually did abysmally in this election. Normally, they win a ton of seats in Scotland, and they only won like 9 seats.
Oh wow.
You have the Reform UK Party, which some of you who are somewhat familiar with British politics might know the name Nigel Farage. That was his party. They're the far right party that pushed hard on Brexit, which ended up being a horrible disaster for the UK.
Yeah.
And ended up leading to the resignation of David Cameron, and later the resignation of Theresa May, because she completely fucked up trying to create a Brexit deal. So we don't like them. We don't like the Reform UK party. It does have multiple parties, and many of those parties do have seats in the parliament. Now, after an election takes place, a prime minister is elected within that parliament. And again, the prime minister is the head of state. Now, if one party has a majority, which in the British parliament, because in all there are 650 seats, in order to have a majority, you need to have 326 seats. And if one party has 326 seats, then their head of party will automatically become basically automatically become the prime minister. Effectively automatically become the prime minister. Now, in some cases, one party does not get a majority. So they have to form what's called a coalition government, where they might have to work with some of the third parties in order to come up with an agreement on who's going to be the prime minister, and thus how you're going to actually form a government. But this did not happen in this election.
Yeah. In this case, the Labor Party actually achieved a majority of seats and was able to elect their party leader.
Yep. And in terms of the number of seats, they fucking dominated.
Yeah, they absolutely did.
Like, this many new people have not been sent to Parliament since 1945.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. And then that was because they were killed and they needed a bunch of new parliamentarians. No. Yeah. Labor.
Probably something like that. But there are 335 brand new members of Parliament. That means
That's
more than
crazy.
More than half of the people in Parliament are brand spanking new.
Wow, that's remarkable. Yeah, Labor won 412 seats of the 650 seats. The Conservatives only won 121, which was down from 365 seats in 2019. So they were absolutely fucking trounced by the Labor Party in this case. What's really interesting about this is though as you look at how kind of we came to this the result, we can get a bit more into the analysis part of it now, which is it seems as if the voters in this country were united primarily by their opposition and dissatisfaction with the Conservative Party. Yeah. So for lots of reasons, I think Nathan mentioned a lot of them. The austerity has been really difficult for people. They haven't been able to tackle their significant economic problems. There's also been a number of just embarrassments and kind of scandals. You had Boris Johnson, who aside from being just generally speaking somewhat of a buffoon, and kind of got ousted after some scandals about having parties during COVID, even while the rest of the country was totally locked down. You had Liz Truss, who spent less time as prime minister than it took for a head of lettuce to rot, and caused like a mini economic crisis just by publishing her economic plan because it was so bad. and then that gave rise to Rishi Sunak, who's the prime minister, or who was the prime minister at this time, who just has, because of these austerity policies that Nathan mentioned, just like been incredibly unpopular. His approval rating at this point is just 18%. Yeah, which is crazy. Yeah. So even though he pledged to, like, you know, build more houses if elected and ease taxes for self-employed people and for some reason deport asylum seekers to Rwanda, whether or not they came from Rwanda, like all this stuff, his government was chaotic. They were unpopular. They were very conservative. And so the analytics coming out of Britain is that basically, like, people are moving largely against that party, rather than like towards necessarily the Labor Party.
Yeah.
And partially that's, you know, because like the Labor Party, as the Conservative Party has moved more right, the Labor Party has kind of moved a bit more center, and they're a little bit, you know, just humdrum, which is, I think, what they're kind of looking for to some degree.
Yeah.
But like, yeah, things like the fact that, you know, they won a huge majority of seats, 412 of the 650. But they managed to do so by kind of narrow margins across a bunch of people. So you're not seeing like a huge landslide of voters passionately like coming out, like turning out for them. You're seeing like small marginal victories in a bunch of these seats.
Yeah. One thing to keep in mind is that when you actually look at the popular vote breakdown, it shows you some of the flaws with first past the post voting, which, you know, is definitely an issue that we have in the United States. But let's just take a look at this. So, like I said, the Labor Party in the end was able to win 412 seats, which is far more than the majority that they needed in order to win.
Yeah, it's like 63% of the seats.
But they won 33.8% of the popular vote.
Yeah.
The Conservative Party, who won 121, they got 23.7% of the popular vote. Now let's look at some of the other parties. The next biggest party in Parliament, like I said, is the Liberal Democrats.
Yeah.
They won 72 seats in Parliament, which is actually an increase of 64 seats.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Which is another thing. It's like, who's the most centrist kind of party that isn't the far right party?
Well, so there's also a reason for that, but we'll get to that. And it'll actually lead to one of the themes for when we're discussing the French election. So the Liberal Democrats won 72 seats, which is an increase of 64 seats, and they got 12.2% of the vote. But here's a really interesting thing. The Reform Party, like I said, the far right party, they got 14.3% of the vote, right? Of the popular vote.
Sure.
Now remember, the Liberal Democrats got 12.2. So the Reform Party actually got more of the popular vote than the Liberal Democrats, who got 72 seats. The Reform Party, 5.
Yeah. Interesting.
They won 5 seats.
Yeah, sure.
So
which makes sense. In a first past the post voting system, even in one with a parliamentary system, you're kind of waiting essentially like land. You're saying like these sections of physical property where some of the people live are like each getting to be represented equally, for, you know, somewhat regardless of the population there. So like you can have these weird outcomes that happen as a result. Yeah.
So one thing that there's this Vox article which lays out both the British election and the French election. One of the reasons that they cite for why there was a massive increase of Liberal Democrats in the parliament, and also why the Labour Party was able to win in such a landslide, despite having such a low percentage of the vote. is because there was a certain level of strategic voting.
Sure.
So if you're in a district where maybe you would normally vote for the liberal Democrat,
Yeah.
but the liberal Democrat has no fucking chance,
Yeah.
and you just wanted to defeat the conservatives, well, maybe you vote for Labor. Or if
Totally.
you're in a district where the Labor candidate has no chance,
Yeah.
and normally you vote Labor, you vote for a liberal Democrat because, fuck the Tories.
Totally.
So there is a certain level of encouragement for that type of strategic voting. And in many ways, that, along with the fact that reform probably did siphon quite a few votes from the Tories, is probably a huge reason why this happened. So it's, number one, it's a certain level of electoral strategy
Yeah.
from the opposition party. And number two, a vitriol towards the incumbent.
Totally. I think that is a great theme to call out. And it leads to these kind of weird, potentially counterintuitive results, because you have, when you're voting against someone, you have like ticket splitting. You like vote, it's the same thing a phenomenon we see in the US elections, where like you'll have someone, who is like closer to a Trump voter, but they can't stand Trump. So instead of voting for Biden, they vote for a third party. And so like you're starting to see these spoiler effects that kind of happen. And in this case, it's happening on like a much larger scale. And it's happening so consistently, right? Across a ton of different constituencies that you can get to 2/3 of the seats with 1/3 of the votes.
Ready to talk about France?
Let's talk about France. I think that's a great place to talk about France. So similarly, on July 7th, France had its second round of voting in its national election. So you might be wondering, why does France have two rounds of voting? So the French system, which is even more different still, the French system has a two-stage election process. So the first vote, which took place a week or so before the second vote, basically serves to winnow out weaker candidates in order to narrow down, candidates who are running into like the most likely ones. And then that second vote focuses on those like more likely to win candidates who are then able to actually make it into their parliament.
Yeah. So there are a few other important differences that we need to understand about the way the French system works as opposed to the United States system, because it can be a little confusing. Because France has a prime minister and they have a president. Normally we think of, okay, so the head of state in a parliamentary system is the prime minister. In a presidential system, it's the president. So boom, it's not that complicated, move on. And then French comes along and says, hold my beer. Or
Charcus! We are so complicated.
So basically, the president is directly elected by the French people. And the president serves as the head of state and basically the head of foreign policy, right? The prime minister is elected in a sort of similar way to the British prime minister, where if one party wins a majority, they usually get to decide who the prime minister is. Now, the prime minister is appointed by the president, but they have to be approved by the parliament, by a majority of the parliament. What that usually means is whichever party is in control of the parliament, they're the ones that get to choose who that prime minister is going to be in the end, because they're going to have to, in the end, they're going to have to negotiate with the president. And there's also this other kind of complicated system where they'll basically hold a few votes where they'll try to get a majority. And if after 3 rounds of that, no person gets a majority, then they basically, on the third round, they just go with a plurality, in which case, whichever party has a plurality gets to decide who the prime minister is.
Interesting.
That's a whole complicated, convoluted thing. But, so the reason why it's important to understand the parliamentary elections is because the prime minister in France is the head of the government, and they are in charge of domestic policy and the day-to-day governing.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So this election was the result of was like similar to the UK. It was a snap election that was called actually a few years earlier than was necessary, and was called by the president following a vote for the European parliamentary elections, where the far right party in France, the National Rally Party, what like achieved made a ton of progress gaining seats in the European Parliament.
Yeah.
And
For those
so
of you that are somewhat familiar with French politics, the National Rally Party is Marie Le Pen's party.
yes, yeah, who has been making a ton of progress in gaining support and popularity on their far right agenda over like the last 10 years or so.
Yeah.
And so after they were elected to the European Parliament, Macron said, who's the president, said that, he wanted to basically like clarify for voters the political situation in the country, and like clarify, get more of a mandate essentially for like what agenda the voters were preferring. And so he called this election ahead of time, basically. And one thing to call out, which is kind of weird about calling this election, is Emmanuel Macron's party, which is the centrist kind of party in the country, is pretty unpopular, which is, I think, a theme generally that we're seeing is like incumbent parties that are in power are pretty unpopular right now. So pretty risky move to call an election early on. Unfortunately, it has not really clarified much about the political situation in France or the preferences of the voters, except to clarify that it is a pretty polarized country in a lot of ways. And we can probably learn some stuff from that.
Yeah. So, like Michael had mentioned, they do 2 rounds of voting to kind of weed out the less important parties or the less important candidates. And in the first round of voting, the National Rally Party actually won a plurality of seats. So there was this massive panic that they were basically shaping up to take control of the government.
Yeah.
And if they take control of the government, then that basically means that they get to decide who the next prime minister is going to be. Which means that the next prime minister would be somebody who is a far right nut job. Yeah,
totally. Because they really are a super far right party. They've been like slowly gaining traction in French politics for a decade or so. As I mentioned, they were like pretty marginal until like 2012, and then Marine Le Pen ran for president in 2017 and then again in 2022. And you may remember her from 2022 because that was like a tense situation, even internationally, looking at a far right candidate getting that close to becoming France's president. Ultimately, she was like defeated, but this party has become, and as as is indicated by them winning like seats in the European Parliament, and then also a plurality in this first round of voting, they're a significant and important and increasingly popular voting bloc for the kind of far right constituents in France, especially as at least over the last few years they've been trying to tiptoe back from their most hateful anti-Semitic, anti-migration policies and just do like normal amounts of far-right lunacy, which is, a little bit like what we're seeing from the Trump campaign right now, being like, oh, maybe we're not into Project 25 and maybe abortion, is okay eventually, and things like that. Yeah.
What ended up happening is in the second round of voting is being described by many in the media as basically a miracle for the left.
Yes.
Now, I don't know if that's a completely accurate description, and I'll explain why, but here are the results. So there are 577 seats in the French Parliament, the National Assembly. In order to get a majority, you need 289. So the New Popular Front, which is basically the the leftists in France. It's a coalition of various different more left-wing parties in France. They won 178 seats. Macron's party, which is basically the center left, more so center party, won 150 seats, and the National Rally, Le Pen's party, won 142 seats.
Yeah.
So the center left and the left collectively ended up winning a majority of the seats, and thus preventing any type of majority or even plurality from the National Rally Party.
Totally. And this is where things get really interesting. Because so a couple things. There's this like social pact in France, which I'm not going to attempt to pronounce, but basically it was formed after like World War II. And basically there's just a social convention that if a far right candidate comes along, we fucking band together, we get over our differences, and we make sure that they don't rise to power. and that's exactly what happened in this case. So we had Nathan mentioned the new Popular Front Party. So this is a Scotch tape and bubblegum party, combining like the Green Party, socialists, communists, a party called France Unbowed, and basically like it is a coalition of all of these smaller parties, which span a pretty wide, actually, like political spectrum, and don't always get along. In fact, like the kind of main prominent figure of the France Unbowed Party, which is Jean-Luc Mélenchon, and the leader of the Place Publique Party, they don't get along. They don't even speak. Like these people like truly set aside significant political differences just to form this party in order to get that like get kind of first place in total number of seats, and then are like teaming up with Emmanuel Macron to get the majority and gain control of the parliament. So and
so
again,
remember,
Macron's party is the centrist type party. Like they're basically like the conservatives of this coalition, and they're willing to like get together to basically, similar to the UK votes, in order to like kind of stop the movement on the far right.
Yeah. So you know how I noted that in the UK, when you don't get a majority, you have to form a coalition government. That's basically what needs to happen now. But what's interesting about this is that the fact that the National Rally Party, the far right party, got in third place was actually, interestingly enough, a major piece of strategic ingenuity on the part of the New Popular Front and Macron's party. Because get this, when you're looking, you know, I told you that the number of seats for, again, New Popular Party, 178, Macron's party, 150, a National Rally Party, 142. But when you look at the percentage of votes, the New Popular Front, 26.9%.
Wow.
Macron's party, 22.3%. National Rally Party, 37.3%.
Totally.
They won a plurality of the popular vote. But what happened was, so after the first round of votes, there were some instances in which there were three parties on the ballot. And when those three parties were New Popular Front, Macron and National Rally Party, what would happen was that the New Popular Front and Macron's party would get together and be like, all right, who's
going to be on there? Yeah.
Like, which of our candidates is definitely not going to win? And they would, when they figured that out, the other one would drop out. And again, this went both ways. Like, what's interesting is that you rarely see a lot of like coordination in the United States from like the more establishment to try to, you know, drop out to let a leftist win. You don't see
Sure.
that as often.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
like they did that.
Mhm.
Like it was like okay, in here we have a a Macron's party, a New Popular Front party, but the Macron guy just has no chance of winning, so he's going to drop out so that they can make sure
Yeah.
that the National Rally Party does not win.
Yeah.
And that's what they did, and that is why they were able to defeat
Yeah.
them. Again,
Yeah.
like the British system, there are two important things that went in to this result. Number one, gaming the electoral system. Number two, hatred of incumbency.
Yeah. Well, not incumbency in this case.
No, hatred of incumbency, because the only reason why in the first round of ballots, the two parties that emerged were the far right party and the left wing party is because people fucking hated Macron. People were pissed at Macron.
Yeah. I see what you mean. Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think that's good to call that out because because we didn't have the far. I think it's a good thing to call it because we didn't have the far right party in power, so it's tempting to be like, oh well, it must not be about incumbency then, except for the fact that Macron really this was a loss of seats and a loss of power and influence from Macron's party that necessitated a leftward movement and combination with the RFP in order to create a government and reject the far right.
Yeah.
So like that's one of the reasons why I called out in the beginning like that this election indicated a lot more about polarization in France, an outward movement from the center, but they were pushed out from the center by, to your point, the fact that the center party had incumbency in this case, and people were looking for change agents. So like people pushed far left, people pushed far right, and the reason why power kind of control kind of stayed the same is because of the presumable leftward movement of the center party in order to basically like form the lesser of two evils and vote like defeat the far right party. So I think those are exactly the right themes to call out. Probably in addition to the general theme of first past the post voting systems can really result in some weird fucking stuff anytime there aren't just two people on the ballot, and having only two people on the ballot like is not the best way to select someone that we actually want. So everybody should use ranked choice voting. That's my other overarching theme about first past the post.
Yeah. So the big question is, because we're Americans and we're American centric, and all other countries don't matter.
Sure. Or they only matter to the extent that they affect us.
Exactly. What can we learn from the French and British election? Now, I would argue that it's not necessarily that that the far left is on the rise per se, or that the center is on the rise, or I sure as hell wouldn't say that the right is on the rise.
Yeah.
I would say that anti-incumbent sentiment is on the rise.
Yeah.
Because people realize kind of how shitty things are.
Yeah.
Basically, there needs to be a candidate that is running on reform, that is running on trying to make things better. Status quo politics is toxic right now.
Yeah.
So, with that in mind, what should the United States think about this? Like, what takeaway should we do? Well, one obvious argument that I would make is that this is another reason why I think that Biden needs to drop out, because we definitely do not want a push in the direction of right-wing reform, because right-wing reform is just going to make all of our problems worse. But we could seize on that desire for reform to try to push for a candidate that's actually going to be more willing to do reform, or that might be able to have more ground to stand on in terms of reform. And at this point, that is pretty much any Democrat who is not Joe Biden.
Yeah.
At this point, I think you could even make the argument that it could be Kamala Harris. And Kamala Harris, in many ways, does have a good amount of legitimacy, considering the fact that she's the vice president, and she would have automatic access to the war chest.
Yes, totally. That money is going to be key, especially for her because she's not the most popular person. While she does have a lot of name recognition, she's going to have to
Yeah.
spend her way towards a bit of popularity there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, there's a lot of polling that's out right now basically saying like, well, actually, all of these other candidates that you think might do well, they're losing to Trump. But the thing is, a lot of these candidates are people that no one fucking knows.
Yeah, totally.
Like,
Name
people
recognition
know
is a
Trump.
huge challenge. Yeah.
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 But the thing is, if Biden does drop out, the moment he drops out, whoever becomes the new candidate becomes a somebody, like becomes, a subject of national conversation. That's important to note.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's right. I think like if we learn anything from this, like people are dissatisfied and they're voting against that dissatisfaction. And so the choice then for Biden becomes try to make the case that Trump is a bad enough villain that he's not the antidote to your dissatisfaction. But that's something that Democrats have been trying to do since 2016 or 2015 against Trump, and it lands like sometimes and most of the time not. So giving them something to vote towards so that what they're voting against is the status quo and what they're voting towards is something different, some stability, some control. I think Biden's the biggest liability, aside from just like the fact that Trump is going to beat him over the head with like being able to speak in sentences that connect to each other, is just that his strength and leadership seems really weak right now. And like aside from incumbency, like being someone that is can't be like trusted with this really fragile moment seems like a huge liability.
So now it's time for one of our more lighthearted segments, Tips for Good. So, Michael, why do we do Tips for Good every week?
Well, Nathan, the real reason is because I love your mom, but it's the season of the sticks. And I saw your mom. She forgot that I existed. And it's half my fault. But I just like to play the victim. I'll drink alcohol till my friends come home for Christmas. That's
my
really why
mom
we
listens
do
to this podcast.
I know that. Hopefully that means she didn't forget that I existed.
I have never heard that song ever.
I think that first line is actually I love Vermont, but it always sounds like he's saying I love your mom. So I like to go with that.
Okay, so like
that's more of a modern one, Nathan.
I've never heard that song.
It's really popular right now with anybody who listens to music who's under
with anybody who listens to music
35. Anybody who's listening to music right now listens to that song.
Yeah, I'm at that point where I no longer listen to any songs that are like new that just came out.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense though, because like the oldies, they are nice. They make you feel good. They make overall they make the world a little bit better. And I think
that
maybe we
is
should
true.
Just skip to that.
That is true. They do make the world a better place.
Well, let's just go with that then.
And that's actually why we do Tips for Good.
Oh, of course, man. I should have
there.
stopped guessing. So Nathan, what is our tip for good this week?
Well, this week's Tips for Good is a little bit more self-serving. But
as all tips for good should be.
But I do think that this is an important point that needs to be said, an important stance that needs to be made. When a parent shows you a picture of their adorable baby, don't roll your eyes. Now, there's this common trend in like memes or in media where it's like, this person's showing me a picture of their ugly ass shitty baby. I don't give a fuck about babies. I'm never going to have a baby. I don't even like babies. Fuck your kids. I hate kids.
Sure. People say that a lot.
People say that a lot. And like that's the common butt. That's like the common butt of the joke in sitcoms or in internet memes. And I am here to tell you, don't roll your eyes. You know why? Because my shitty ass kid, when she grows up, is going to be paying for your fucking Social Security. And in the meantime, I'm over here in a system that does not pay for universal pre-K, that does not pay for universal child care, that got rid of the child tax credit. I'm doing free-ass labor raising a kid that is one day going to make it so your ass can retire.
Yeah. And ultimately, at least in the beginning, you're doing that because it's cute.
Yeah, I'm doing that because it's cute. You might not like how the kid looks. Fucking tough. They're going to be paying your Social Security. Pretend to like it. Pretend to like my adorable, beautiful daughter that I have just shown a picture of to you.
Yeah.
All right? Just fucking pretend. Because you know what? I am spending countless hours that I am not being paid for. They're not being paid for by the government. They're not being paid for by anyone, doing free-ass labor so that your moocher ass can actually retire someday. And look, I get it. You don't want to have kids. Fine. I'm not going to fault you for that. I'm not an authoritarian asshole, all right? I'm not going to say you're forced to have kids or you have to have kids. I would never do that. But the least you can fucking do is when I show you a picture of my kid, you can say, that kid is adorable.
I just want to disclaim a little bit. Nathan's not talking to me.
No.
So he must be talking to you. 'Cause I always say his kid is adorable. I always respond to I most of the time respond to the pictures. Yeah, it's but yeah, we talked about this before. We talked about the power, the free labor that parents do that delivers a tremendous amount of value to society. We talked about that in the context of the support that we as a society and our government should provide to parents. And this is like the freest thing you can do to help provide some of that support is just be nice about it. So that's Tips for Good. Okay, so we are continuing on the topic of international elections because, boy, there is nothing people like more than hearing about elections in countries that they don't know anything about.
Here's the thing. Right now, that might actually be true because shit is so bad in the United States.
That's true.
Like, it's kind of nice to know that elsewhere in the world things
aren't as fucked.
Okay, I wouldn't say that things aren't as fucked in Iran as they are in the United. Like, it's way shittier in Iran.
It's way shittier
compared to where Iran was and where it could have been. This is the better result.
Yeah,
this is the less shitty result.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah. Now, that is also keeping in mind the fact that the reason why Iran is so fucked up in a authoritarian theocracy is because, the United States did this little thing where, they elected a secular, democratic leader, but we didn't like that leader because they wanted to nationalize the oil, and we wanted the oil. So then the CIA, kind of, created a coup.
Yeah.
And installed the Shah, who was then overthrown by the Ayatollah, who created an authoritarian government that is hell-bent on hating the United States. So, kind of our fault that things are so fucked there.
I've actually had a similar experience, Nathan. Sometimes you're like making a recipe and you're cooking and you put all your ingredients into your pressure cooker and you turn it on, and what comes out is just not what you were expecting. You wanted oil. What comes out is an authoritarian theocratic dictatorship. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, the Shah was a religious leader of religious theocracy. They created a religious theocracy. They were just pro-American. And so in the end, we ended up with a government that was both authoritarian and anti-American. So the worst of all worlds.
Fair enough. Except, Nathan, how can you say that they're authoritarian when they just had an election? You ignorant fuck. So, the Iranian presidential election. All right, so the Iranian presidential election was held between June and July in 2024, so just this year. The prior president, Ebrahim Raisi, was a hardline conservative, but he died unexpectedly in a helicopter crash in May. And so similar on some kind of similar trend of like these snap elections, an election was held. in July, and the results were pretty surprising. So Raisi was one of the kind of few figures trusted by both the security kind of government establishment and also the regime of like clerical guardians who are the overseers of the theocratic side of the Iranian like government and laws. And so he was expected to kind of oversee the transition to a new supreme leader in the eventual passing of their current supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, and potentially even going like ascending to be the supreme leader himself until his death. And that kind of threw all the plans for Iranian leadership kind of up in the air and necessitated a new election. So I guess we should probably talk about the Iranian form of government and what the president is and what the supreme leader is and all that stuff in order to really be able to make sense of all this, huh?
Yeah. So basically, nothing is approved. Nothing happens without the approval of the supreme leader, which as Michael talked about is Khamenei. Khamenei actually is the one that approved all of the candidates to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
Like, no candidates were allowed to run without his say-so.
Yeah.
And on top of that, the voter turnout was pretty fucking low.
Yeah.
I mean, it was higher in comparison to some other Iranian elections. But the thing about Iranian elections is that they are definitely not free and fair per se.
Yes. Yeah.
So one important thing to understand about the Iranian government, because there is basically this ruling class of the supreme leader,
Mm-hmm.
the elections are not necessarily free and fair.
Yeah.
Voter turnout was 49.6%, which is actually fairly... It's lower than the historical record, but it's higher than the first round of voting on June 28th, which was actually historically low. And there were also like over 600,000 ballots that were voided, which those are ballots that are usually put out there that don't have any of the candidates, and those are done as a protest vote.
Gotcha.
By people that hate both candidates.
Yeah.
But a lot of people just straight up don't even bother because whoever is elected is approved by the Ayatollah, which is a big way in which they're not free and fair.
Totally.
But that being said, the person who was elected, who again is approved by the theocratic government, and theocracy is bad, is much more of a reform type candidate, is much more moderate in terms of Iran. So one of the things that he is promising to do is he's promising to end the restrictions on what women are allowed to wear in public. So you might actually remember that there was this massive protest about a year ago by many women within the country of Iran after the death of Masana Amani, who was detained by police for basically wearing her hijab incorrectly, because they have a morality police in Iran, which, by the way, if you have a morality police in your country, you're probably like something's fucked up.
Well, you probably don't have free and fair elections. That's
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So that led to this massive protest in 2022, where, interestingly enough, the most reliable source of information about what was happening on the streets of Iran actually came from TikTok, because the media is controlled by the Iranian theocracy. So, and also a huge population within Iran is actually young. Like, they have a very young population, but of course a very old governing party or governing class. So there's actually a lot of progressive sentiment among the young people within the country, but, there's not a lot that they can really do about this. And the best that they could do was elect this guy who is promising to basically get rid of all of those mandates.
Yeah.
Now he has said that he promises to keep respecting the theocracy.
Mm-hmm. I mean, he would not have been even on the ballot had he not.
Yeah.
And, importantly, I don't think there was really any opportunity to overthrow that in a non violent way. Ultimately, it's a coup or status quo in that respect, I think. But even just having a reformist as the president, and the president, to your point, Nathan, can't set policy. They can't change really the way the country is run. That is the, area of the supreme leader. But the president does have kind of essentially influence over the agenda and objectives and how the government is run. The president, he's still the head of state and kind of responsible for day-to-day running of the government. And so even if he is limited in what kinds of things he can actually implement, what kind of reforms he can actually implement, having a reformist get elected is a big step, especially for elections there in general. To your point, Nathan, in the original election, they had a 40% turnout or so, and no one got a majority. And then in the runoff, that engagement boosted turnout to 50%, which is more in the normal range, with him getting nearly 55% of the vote. So there's once people recognize, hey, there actually is someone here and who actually might be able to be elected and is a little bit better than our average hardline theocrats, people turned out to support him.
Yeah. Interestingly enough, one of the general sentiments that I was seeing in some of the interviews that the AP had with various voters was much more of a anti-hardliners sentiment than a pro,
hey,
this guy's actually going to reform. People that say, we do support reform, this guy's probably not going to reform that much. But he's not a hardliner, so, come on in. Which kind of goes back to some of the things we talked about in the other segment, which is that anti-incumbency sentiment, being disappointed with the current system, because the previous president who died in a helicopter crash, he was a hardliner. Another thing that's important to note about this, and this is something that I think is going to be most relevant to us, of course, as Americans, is that he is much more open to talks with the United States.
Yes.
Now, one of the reasons why that's important is because words cannot really express how much Trump fucked our ability to have any level of diplomatic relationship with Iran.
Seriously.
And
oh
actually ended up leading to more popularity among the hardliners in Iran. Because the Obama administration negotiated the Iran nuclear deal, which basically made it so that they would not be allowed to produce any weapons grade uranium. And they would have to allow inspectors in to make sure that they were not doing that. And in return, the United States lifted some sanctions. Now, Trump, being a fucking idiot, claimed that, what actually happened was we just sent them money, which they could then use to create a bunch of nuclear weapons, which that is not what lifting sanctions is. And
no part of that is what happened.
No part of that is accurate. It was literally lifting sanctions, so unfreezing money that was already theirs, or decreasing restrictions for some of their ruling people, in exchange for not producing weapons-grade uranium. And our inspectors showed that they were fulfilling the deal. But the thing is, Republicans decided they were against it for one very simple reason. Obama did it. And Trump decided to rip it up because Obama did it. And that basically made the reformists in Iran look like fucking idiots. And to further that, when Trump, on a whim, decided, I'm going to go kill a top Iranian general and hope that it doesn't create World War III, or maybe he hoped it would, because he's a fucking idiot, that made the hardliners even more popular and the reformists look even more like a bunch of idiots.
Yeah.
So the fact that there is some sentiment towards reform that is starting to come back in Iran is important for us to think about. Because if Trump gets elected, any possibility of a diplomatic relationship with Iran, which, by the way, that door is open right now,
Yes.
will just be fucking gone.
Totally. Yeah. Totally. This president has explicitly talked about being open to returning to a nuclear agreement with the West.
Yeah.
Like,
he wants to get those sanctions lifted.
Exactly.
Like, that's his big priority. He wants to get those sanctions lifted.
Exactly. And so, like, that is a significant opportunity here. So, like, I mean, is this guy, Bernie Sanders? No. But it's like a step in the right direction for sure. Like, ultimately, he's committed to continuing to support the Iranian theocratic government, of course. He wouldn't be able to be on the ballot if not. He's committed to supporting the inclusion of Islamic, social principles into the government and the laws. But in the end, he's not expected to diminish the Iranian government support for Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthi movement or anything like that. But he is against, like, coercing people to comply with mandatory hijabs and headscarves and internet censorship and some of the, like, most restrictive parts of the social laws and morality laws in their society. He's open to international cooperation and reaching a deal with the West on reducing nuclear proliferation and removing sanctions. Like, this is a move in the right direction. And the fact that he was allowed to be on the ballot, the fact that he was ultimately elected and garnered public support, like, is he going to reform everything? No, but definitely a step in the right direction. And to your point, Nathan, an interestingly connected theme to all three elections that took place over the last few months in Europe and the Middle East is this agitated mobilization against the status quo, against incumbency, against how frustrating and difficult things are, and how angry we are with how things are just sitting and seemingly getting no better. So all of that is, like, there's plenty of bright side here to be optimistic about. Next, we have one of our favorite segments, the D-Bag Award. So Nathan, what is a D-Bag Award?
Well, Michael, the D-Bag Award is an award that we give out to somebody that makes an argument that's just so stupid and self-defeating that we just want to point and laugh at it and say, come look at the freak. And of course, it was named after Alan Dershowitz, the original D-Bag himself, for that fateful time that he stood in front of Congress and said that Donald Trump could not have possibly done anything that rose to the level of impeachment when he pressured a foreign government to help him in an election, because he believed that it was within the country's best interests for him to win the election.
Yeah, and that landed better as a Dershowitz bag, D-bag, self-defeating argument before the Supreme Court basically said that, yep, that's legit.
Yeah, that's...
We may have to rethink this one, but for now...
The new D-bag is the Supreme Court, I guess.
Well,
maybe it's the Roberts bag.
The R bag. It doesn't quite have the same ring to it as a D-bag.
It doesn't.
We'll have to think about it. But for this week, D-bag survives, and we have quite a D-bag. So Nathan,
Dershowitz survives to bag another day.
Oh man, with his age, I hope not. So Nathan, who is our D-bag this week?
We actually have a whole bag full of Ds.
Whole bag of Ds.
A whole bag of Ds, which is what these people should eat. Mm-hmm. Basically, the entire Congressional Republican Party.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. Specifically, so we had like 38 Republicans in the Senate vote against the Right to Contraception Act, which is, as its name implies, an act that protects access to contraception nationally, which failed to make it through the Senate because of these Republicans voting. So, we couldn't get to the 60 votes required for a full Senate vote, and as a result, currently there is no right to contraception in the United States.
Yeah. So I guess not the whole GOP Congress, just most of the Senate.
Exactly. 38 Republicans in the Senate voted against it. Notably, Lisa Murkowski, Susan Collins voted for it. They didn't just abstain or anything like that.
Why would they vote against the right of contraception? Because it seems to me like the party of limited government would think that it's probably not the government's place to tell people that they can't use contraception. So like what was their argument? Michael?
Nathan, that's where the D-bag comes in, because that's exactly right. The party of limited government should be limited, Nathan. We should not have a government out there passing laws to define our rights. That's basically what they're saying. Their opposition to this bill was that there is no reason to pass the Right to Contraception Act because there is no current threat to contraception, Nathan, which means that by voting against this act to protect contraception, they have coalesced a threat to contraception.
Like, they made the same fucking argument when there was that Marriage Equality Act.
Mm-hmm.
Like, basically what it boils down to is this. The Democrats are trying to do this vote as a political stunt, all right? They know that contraception is popular and that contraception not being available would be unpopular. They know all of that. So they set up this as a trap for us as Republicans to fall into. So we're not going to fall into it. We're just going to vote against it.
Yeah.
Therefore, falling into the trap.
Yeah.
It's like the Democrats did this just because they want to make us Republicans look like assholes.
Yeah, they're forcing
we're
us
gonna
to
look
vote
like
against
assholes.
it. Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Or you could just fucking vote for it and be like, what are they talking about? Like, we were never a threat to them. What
exactly.
Like, this is totally a political move by these Democrats that are pretending that we're more extreme than we are. So we're going to prove that we're not more extreme than we are, that we don't believe that the government has any place in telling people that they can't use contraceptions. So we're going to vote for this.
Yep.
Except we're not going to do that because we have the brains of a bunch of deck chairs.
Yeah, exactly. We are going to prove that we are not as extreme as Democrats say by being exactly as extreme as Democrats say we are. Yeah, it is hilariously self-defeating, and they keep getting it wrong. It's so funny. But ultimately, they're telling on themselves. So in that way, their argument is incredibly self-defeating. So congratulations to our 38 Republicans who voted against this bill for being this week's D-bag. And now we'll end our show as we usually do with our highlights. So Nathan, what's your highlight this week?
My highlight is that this last week, I became a year closer to death.
Mm-hmm.
I had a birthday,
and
my parents actually came by, and my parents came up or down, I guess, because I'm south of them. And we had, they stayed with us for a few days. We had a really nice time. We saw fireworks on the 4th, which is the day before my birthday, which has always been fun. And yeah, it was just good to spend time with my parents. We played Cards Against Humanity.
Nice. That's fun.
Which is always a fun thing to do with your parents. And yeah, it was just good family time, and it was more hands to hold the baby. So,
nice.
That always makes life easier.
That sounds great.
What about you, Mike? What's your highlight?
Oh man, I had a good July 4th. We were camping over the long weekend. We have a pretty sick camping setup now with a rooftop tent, and we've got Starlink for internet, so I can actually work from basically anywhere that's super remote, which is really cool. So we did that, and then on Friday we had we had some of our friends who got engaged, and we were in on the secret and helped that happen. And then I saw my aunt and uncle and cousins as well. It was just like a crazy, busy, but also fun and really nice long weekend over July 4th. So, yeah, it was great.
Nice, dude.
Yeah, and now we'll thank all the amazing people that make this show possible. So thank you to our incredible patrons, Jerry DeValer, Taylor Bloom, Fade Out Scoop, Kyle Cheska, and Tobias Janssen for supporting the show and making it possible. And thank you to our incredible editor, Kayla, for all they do to put this show on. And thank you, dear listener, for listening to The Spectrum, and you'll hear from us again next week.